So Canadian softwood lumber has already been hit with significant duties. What does the extra 10% mean for the industry?
On top of the 35% devastation, on top of already a bad situation.
The lumber industry is getting annihilated here in Canada. Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today we're finding out the lumber industry, they're being told one thing by Team Carney, and then they're doing another. Carney and his team trying to help out the steel and aluminum industry, while the lumber industry goes up in flames. Trump has imposed a new 10% additional tariff to the other 35% that already existed on the lumber industry, and now we're going to see more Canadian jobs disappear like we've seen in the canola industry, the auto industry, the seafood industry, the steel, the aluminum, the copper industries, and now the lumber industry. We are getting annihilated. Let's jump into this. We've got this one. Pick Your Own. Farms in Ontario, a $1.5 billion industry in the province, are reporting striking surge in produce thefts. Every apple that's stolen is money out of our pocket. The problem is we're bringing in way too many people from South Asia who just don't operate by the same code of conduct. This has already been shown. They're going in there and stealing fruit. I wouldn't be surprised if Canadians are stealing fruit because Canadians can't afford to live anymore because of what the Liberals have done. Bad policies, enriching themselves. Canadians are poor, sleeping in the streets, sleeping in their cars, sleeping in tents. And it's the farmers that pay the price here. People from low trust cultures. I mean, it's just, that's it. You bring in people from different culture with different rules. That's what you get. We got this one here. PM Mark Carney was forced to take a charter flight to Egypt for signing of the agreement to end the Israel chips and hummus conflict because there were no air crews available to fly the Canadian Armed Forces jet. This is embarrassing. Come on. Yeah, meanwhile, Donald Trump coming in with an escort. Got this one from Franco Terrazzano. So he's brought on CTV to talk about the CRA automatic tax filing. I thought this was pretty funny.
Carney says that a lot of low-income Canadians don't file their taxes and therefore they miss out on a lot of the benefits that they might be receiving in return. So if you don't support this, is there another option that you do support that would still allow these benefits to come in?
Well, what's the old saying? The road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? I mean, we all worry about our neighbors who are going through a tough time, right? But if you look at modest income people with simple tax situations, the solutions are already there. And the solutions are outside of government without expanding the power of the CRA over taxpayers, right?
Yeah, the government doesn't need any more power here. The government shouldn't be telling us how much tax to pay when they're the ones collecting it. This is ridiculous conflict of interest. Moving ahead, we've got this. Trump administration quietly canceled the nation's largest solar project. America spent billions of dollars on some of these solar projects. They've been an absolute disaster. Last week, the Internal Department Bureaus of Land Management quietly changed this project status to canceled on its federal permitting webpage. What does Mark Carney think about this? Carney clearly wanting to push his net zero agenda. The topic of pipelines is not going away.
To pipelines, if you can, and I know you've written on this for ctv.ca as well. Your thoughts on whether we're getting any clearer of a commitment from the federal government on whether any new pipelines will be built. We know Alberta says this is essential. There's a showdown with British Columbia. But again, you talked about President Trump, the idea of maybe, a resuscitation of the Keystone XL pipeline down to the U.S.
Well, look, getting Canadian products, we've heard, we can all repeat this phrase ad nauseum now, right? Getting Canadian products to global markets in a more diversified way away from the United States is in Canada's best interests. And we believe in that when it comes to autos. We seem to believe in that when it comes to steel and aluminum. We seem to believe in that when it comes to agricultural products across the board. But when it comes to energy, the federal government seems to say now under Prime Minister Carney that a pipeline would be nice, but we need British Columbia and Alberta to completely reconcile on this issue. Well, they're not going to, for political reasons in both of those provinces. That's a near impossibility. And we have to have Indigenous full buy-in. Well, that's a complicated thing. And if the federal government is going to sort of punt leadership on this to other relationships to sort of reconcile themselves ahead of them taking leadership on this, a pipeline to the west coast of British Columbia is never going to happen, particularly the northwest coast of British Columbia. Prime Minister Carney is to be credited for saying that he wants to have large nation-building projects. He announced his first 5, and he took ownership of those 5 projects. He said, these are the 5 that I want, and here's why I want them. These are the jobs that they will return. This is the economic benefit they will return. But when it comes to pipelines, he takes a back seat and says, we need the provinces to get along. We need for this to be aligned with our holdover environmental policies left over from the Trudeau government. He seems to want to move mountains in order to get other projects done in other areas of the Canadian economy. But when it comes to energy, he seems to not want to take a leadership role. And I think that's become really quite clear now. We have enough time of him as prime minister in office to know that he wants to be seen to be in favor of a pipeline, but he doesn't actually want to drive the ship in terms of getting us towards pipeline reconciliation in this country and actually getting those energy products to global markets. And
yeah, he just nailed it right there. It's all about optics for Mark Carney. It's all about boosting the value of his stocks in Stripe. And pipelines doesn't help do that. It's all a grift. These liberals don't care about prosperity in our own country. They care about their own prosperity.
I hope he proves me wrong, but I think the evidence is clear that this government is not interested in a pipeline to the West Coast.
James?
No, there's not going to be any pipeline unless it's Keystone, and he can do it with carbon capture and Pathways Project, which would directly enrich himself and help push forward his carbon credit agenda. As Mark Nixon's pointing out here, Brookfield bought the largest U.S. pipeline network for $10.9 billion. Why would Brookfield want to create more competition for their own pipelines? When we got Colonial Pipeline here back April 2025, this got purchased. This goes out on the East Coast. It's one of the biggest, if not the biggest pipeline in America. Why would they want to create competition with this? And it's interesting too, though, the different stake shareholders in this. There's $850 million stake in Colonial Pipeline sold to Brookfield. That came from the CDPQ. The CDPQ, as we can follow the line here, goes directly back to Michael Sabia, clerk of the Privy Council, and Marc-Andre Blanchard. As we see here, vice president, head of CDPQ Global. Mark Carney brought these guys in for a reason. If we follow the money further out this direction, where does this line go up here? This goes to Mark Carney's catalytic transition fund. That's right, this climate fund in the UAE. This is all a big grift. Canadians are getting duped. They don't even see it. Caisse de dépôt placement de Quebec, Canada's second largest public pension manager. Brookfield already has a couple of Canadian assets here, oil and gas, but they don't want more competition for their big money maker in America. And we see the same thing in the forestry industry here. Brookfield used to be big in the forestry industry, and they since sold off most of these assets. They still have timberlands, Mosaic, which blocks the majority of Vancouver Island with logging gates, despite those logging artery mains being partially paid for by taxpayers, which I have an entire video on. So while we're talking about logging, well, today there's new tariffs on logging. The logging industry is absolutely getting hammered today.
Nibor is standing by. He's the president and CEO of the Forest Products Association of Canada. What's the takeaway here for you and for the industry, this extra 10%? What does it mean?
Yeah, it's tough. So the 10%, we've already had softwood lumber duties now that have been increased to 35%. So this 10 is on top of that. So for the softwood lumber industry, we're looking at a 45% additional cost to ship lumber across the border. And, you know, you mentioned kitchen cabinets, wood upholstered furniture. This is new for those segments, but this is on top of the existing drama and chaos we've already been seeing on lumber.
Yeah, what kind of strain is this putting? What are you hearing from your members, Derek?
Yeah, people are really frustrated. Like this is why we need some kind of a deal that's going to work for Canadians at the Canada-U.S. trade table. All I'm hearing, you know, the last week since the Prime Minister's visit to Washington is we don't know where we stand right now. I heard the industry minister the other day talking about priorities at the U.S. table being steel and aluminum and energy, and workers in our sector are saying, "What about us?" And that there's two frustrations here. There's the frustration that this is happening. This is completely unnecessary. The U.S. needs our lumber. But the second frustration is just not knowing right now where we stand with the federal government. And we need more urgency from the feds.
Yeah, that's because Brookfield, Mark Carney, doesn't have investments in this industry. They don't care. They're enriching themselves, guys. Like, let's just take a look at it. This has been getting more and more clear day by day here. Out of all the companies that Mark Carney's invested in here, which I've got them all organized by categories, you won't see a forestry category here, and that's for a reason. But here's an interesting connection. If we go back over to the forestry section here, this is where we have Timber West, Brookfield, Timberlands, Mosaic, all this. If we look down here, former logging assets, Longview Timber sold to Weyerhaeuser in 2013. Well, who is Weyerhaeuser? This is a logging company. Now, if we go back over to Mark Carney's list of companies he owns here, what do we have down here? Weyerhaeuser. So they sold the assets to this company. Mark Carney's invested in this one stock, and this is the only logging forestry stock that he owns. So do we think Mark Carney cares about the logging industry? No, he doesn't give a crap.
Realistically, I know you're pretty connected when it comes to politics. What would you like to see from the federal government? What can Mark Carney do?
Yeah, well, so in terms of the U.S. trade talks, lumber being a priority at the table with steel, with aluminum, with autos, and with energy. That's our first ask. And I have to say, you know, our ongoing conversations with federal officials, with negotiators, has been good. But the challenge in the last week is when the cameras are on, they're not talking about lumber. And that's...
You hear that? When the cameras are on, they're not talking about lumber. But they're telling them something behind the scenes. This industry is getting duped. Carney Liberals do not care about the forestry industry in Canada.
You know, our labor partners at Unifor and steelworkers, our mayors in our communities are all calling to say, you know, what the heck is going on here? We need a bit of a reset.
I know what's going on. Moosechart.com. You can look for yourself. You can see what Mark Carney's interested in because you can see his own stocks and what he cares about. And a little side note here about Weyerhaeuser. This is an American company. Mark Carney's only invested in one forestry company, and it's an American one. And you might be wondering, why is he invested in that one? Because sustainable timber. That's why. Sustainable forests. We use trees to make products people need while taking care of our forests and future generations. This is starting to make sense now. This is why this is the only one he's invested in.
Here with the feds to get back to the table with the industry in Canada so we have greater insight to what's going on. And we get this is complex. There are a lot of balls in the air here. But in the last week, our workers in forestry are not feeling like we're a priority.
Yeah, and other markets, you know, people talk about this, oh, well, you know, we can just send the lumber elsewhere. But as you know very well, you know, that is very difficult to do, to sort of rewrite and rewire the whole, you know, the trade strategy that we've got in the lumber industry.
Well, yeah, this is like a decades-long marriage where you're saying, you know, the partner wakes up and says, well, we don't think we want to keep doing this anymore. This is an integrated supply chain that's been built over decades, and the Americans need our wood. And I watched that storm ripping through the northeast of the United States. They're going to need to be doing some rebuilding there, and the quick access they can get to quality wood products from Canada is a great solution. It's not a national security risk, as the president has said with the introduction of the Section 232 tariffs. So you know,
and he's just using that as a negotiating tactic. But when it comes down to it, houses in America are going to become a lot more expensive because they do need our wood.
You know, so two things here. Those negotiations need to have lumber as a priority, and we need to see more urgency. And, you know, my ask of the feds is like, you know, we need a reset here because our workers and our mayors and heads of the chambers of commerce in our communities are feeling we're not a priority right now.
That's because Mark Carney doesn't care about you guys. Moosechart.com. Look for yourself. He does not care, but he does care about locking in this new Lockheed Martin deal, the F-35 fighter jets, because he's invested in Lockheed Martin. You got to follow the money to see what this guy cares about. Meanwhile, we've got this buffoon here, David Eby, pretending that he cares about the logging industry he destroyed in British Columbia.
This additional tariff means that Canadian wood has a higher tariff rate going to the United States than Russia does. I want to let that sink in, that there's a higher tariff on Canadian wood going to the United States, wood that has built American homes, provided affordable and high quality building materials for families and governments across the United States. Our friends south of the border with whom we have worked side by side, fought side by side.
Oh, come on, Eby. You can't blanket rip all the bottles off the shelves of just the red states from stumbling juice stores and then say our friends in America. You were just demonizing Americans, but now you're friends with Americans? Yeah, right. This guy is such a snake. This guy's done more harm to the logging industry than anyone else in the world, including Donald Trump.
That we have worse market access than Russia, an international pariah who has launched a war of aggression on Ukraine. It doesn't make any sense. And this attack has serious consequences for Canadians and for British Columbians.
Why don't you tell that to forestry workers yourself for all your awful policies and decisions that have shut down over 35 mills in just the last handful of years? This guy's destroyed the logging industry. And what Trump's doing with the tariffs doesn't help. But this guy just wants to place the blame like every other leftist liberal, always placing the blame on someone else. This guy's a loser. He's like a little kid throwing a tantrum again. He's an embarrassment to this province and this country.
When auto parts makers, when people who work to build those auto parts, when steel workers in Ontario, when their jobs are in trouble, when their jobs are threatened, it's treated as a national emergency. And what we're asking for today is that same respect that same concern, that same sense of emergency is shared for the forest sector in this country.
This guy's such a loser. He has no respect for the forestry workers in BC. He destroyed the industry himself. He's taken a $6 billion surplus and turned that into an $11 billion deficit. He is a disaster for the province of British Columbia. And as this first comment here says, you know what would totally add revenue to subsidize our lumber workers? Hear me out. A friggin' oil pipeline. David Eby is a grifter, just like Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau and every other leftist loser that seems to be able to claw their way into power in Canada. And here we've got an expert warning this is going to be total devastation for the forestry industry in Canada.
So Canadian softwood lumber has already been hit with significant duties. What does the extra 10% mean for the industry?
Well, it was already bad at 35% duties, obviously, and as of today, 12:01 this morning, actually, there is another 10% on top of the 35%, which brings us to 45.14%, which is devastation on top of already a bad situation. So I believe today a lot of operators, both primary manufacturers and secondary manufacturers, Brink as a secondary manufacturer, have been hit with these duties, and that makes it, for all intents and purposes, not viable to operate in today's market conditions, which are not very good either in the United States at this point. So it puts us in a very, very bad situation.
And you say not viable, and it does impact those on both sides of the border. Tell us more about that. Explain that for our viewers.
Well, first and foremost here is that, the cost already is high. A lot of people have lost their jobs. Nearly 50% of all the sawmills in British Columbia and in other places have shut down or are on layoffs. So it is not very, very constructive. The other reality is obviously that United States interest rates are very, very high, mortgages are high, and the housing starts of new constructed single houses, which usually is measured at 1.5 million houses annually, is probably somewhere around half of that. If it ever comes to the point where it is back to a sense of normal, the U.S. can simply not produce sufficient volumes of lumber to supply their housing requirements, and and are required to purchase already at between 25 and 40% of their requirements under normal conditions. So. What is obvious is that when the market demand goes back to normal, price and demand set price, prices will go up substantially, and the cost of houses will go up substantially. I think the estimate was around $15,000 per house in the United States. Probably with all the duties and tariffs collectively, it will probably go up at $30,000 US annually. So.
This is devastation because home builders are going to be shutting down or producing less homes in America, buying less wood because it's too expensive, which means Canadians lose jobs. There's a big fort behind me here. I believe these things hold the logs in place when they cut them down, and that's what they use further over here. As you just saw from some of that footage there, I went and shot that yesterday out near the port of Nanaimo, near the Harmac Mill on the ocean there. This is another Canadian mill well operating right now. Will this shut down like all the other ones? One after one, because the government doesn't care about Canadians or Canadian workers.
So that's it's bad for both sides of the border.
Yeah, indeed. John, so just a quick note to wrap up. How have you been adapting? What have you heard from your colleagues about how they are adapting?
Well, everybody is looking at their operations more than anything right now. How much are they prepared to lose? Because even at 35% and less than that, the market has been a challenge. There are no operations that I know of before were making any money. For Brink, as an example, we used to employ 400 people. Now we are less than 100. That was before the 45% duties, and are looking at the operations as where do we go from here, and can we continue to operate it under these circumstances? And the answer in a lot of cases will be no. There will be more shuts, there will be more closures across Canada. both for primary and secondary manufacturing. Add to that, that is on the duty side. Add to that the tariff on furniture and other kitchen cabinets and all the other things is 25% tariff. And that has been added to everything. So I'm not sure what we are trying to do here in the United States and in Canada. And I'm encouraged by all the things that happened over the weekend, obviously around the world. That's encouraging. But the relationship between Canada and the United States is being extremely, extremely difficult. And I just don't understand the tariffs and the duties that have no benefit to either the United States and to Canada, and lead us into an area that, at the end of the day in politics, it is the economy stupid. And that right now is moving towards the big R word, in my opinion, across
So he's talking about recession. The reason why Trump's doing this, it doesn't make any sense for Americans or Canadians, but he's doing this as a negotiating tactic to try to pull out wins in other sectors making a deal. He was expecting Mark Carney to try to make a deal, and Carney's not making a deal. So I don't know exactly what's going on here. If these guys know each other, Trump and Carney knew each other from beforehand. Is this just a new playful relationship that they've conjured up here? Have they been working on this together the entire time? Obviously, Mark Carney invested in America, so he doesn't care about Canadian prosperity. But it comes down to it. We have tons of trees in Canada. It's one of our greatest natural resources, and we're losing mills left, right, and center. How is it that we can't sell trees, something we have an abundance of, and our government doesn't care? It's a disgrace.